A bloodied woman in designer clothes collapses on Kalin's doorstep during a thunderstorm, whispering, "Please don't hurt me. I can't walk," before passing out. Kalin, a black single father, hesitates. Last time he helped a white woman in distress, police almost shot him. Behind him, his daughter watches wide-eyed. Before we dive into this story of worlds colliding and prejudice unraveled, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Has society made you hesitate before helping someone different from you? Hit that subscribe button and join us as we discover how one moment of compassion can change everything, even when the world tells you to look the other way. Kalin Washington had never planned on being anyone's savior. At 34, the brilliant software developer already shouldered enough responsibility raising 6-year-old Zora alone in their modest Atlanta home, since his wife Amara succumbed to cancer 2 years earlier. Despite possessing exceptional coding skills that should have placed him among the tech elite, Kalin faced the relentless undertow of racial discrimination that kept promising black professionals treading water while less qualified white colleagues surfed ahead on waves of privilege. His daily reality consisted of seeing his innovative ideas appropriated by white team members, watching promotion opportunities evaporate despite his superior performance metrics, and being forced to work remotely because clients allegedly felt uncomfortable with a black lead developer. The isolation suited his single-parent lifestyle, but reinforced the invisible barriers erected around his potential. That stormy Thursday night had begun like any other, helping Zora with her reading, preparing a simple dinner, then settling into his home office to continue work on his passion project long after tucking his daughter into bed. The thunderstorm had intensified to a savage percussion against the windows when the desperate pounding at his door cut through the rain's rhythm. Caution had become second nature to Kalin. The last time he'd stopped to help a white woman with car trouble, police had arrived with hands on holsters, automatically assuming the worst about his intentions. The memory of those gun barrels pointing at him, while his then-toddler daughter watched from the car seat, haunted his every interaction with strangers. Through the peephole, lightning illuminated a crumpled figure on his porch, a white woman in expensive but torn clothing, her face partially obscured by wet blonde hair plastered against bloody skin. He hesitated, weighing the risk against his conscience, when Zora's small voice behind him asked, "Daddy, who's there?" Before he could answer, another flash revealed the woman's face recognizable, even through the bruising and blood. Alexandra Bennett, the 36-year-old CEO of Bennett Innovations, one of the largest tech companies in the Southeast. Kalin recognized her instantly from industry publications and news segments, the same company that had rejected his job application last year despite his perfect qualifications, citing nebulous cultural fit issues that every black professional recognized as code for too black for our comfort. Now she lay bleeding on his doorstep, soaked by rain and barely conscious. "Please," she whispered when he cautiously opened the door, her eyes reflecting terror beyond her physical pain. "Don't hurt me. I can't walk." The irony wasn't lost on him, this powerful white woman automatically assuming danger from him even as she sought refuge. The brief rage that flashed through him dissolved at his daughter's insistent tugging on his sleeve. "Daddy, she's hurt," Zora said, with the uncomplicated compassion children possess before the world teaches them to calculate risk against reward. Despite every instinct warning him about the potential consequences, Kalin carefully lifted the semi-conscious CEO and brought her inside, leaving a trail of rainwater and blood across his meticulously maintained hardwood floor. Alexandra drifted between consciousness and oblivion as he cleaned her visible wounds and immobilized what appeared to be a broken leg, her occasional moments of lucidity marked by panicked pleas. "Don't call anyone, please, he'll find me." Zora watched wide-eyed from the doorway of the guest bedroom, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant as Kalin tucked a blanket around the shivering woman. Only after settling Alexandra did Kalin allow himself to consider the full weight of his decision. He had just brought one of Atlanta's most recognizable white business leaders, battered, bruised, and apparently fleeing someone, into his home. One anonymous call about a black man with a wounded white woman would bring a SWAT team through his door, asking questions only after the handcuffs were secure. The bitter awareness sat heavy in his chest, His act of basic human decency could cost him everything: his freedom, his daughter, perhaps even his life. Alexandra Bennett awoke the following morning to unfamiliar surroundings that sent immediate panic coursing through her body. The modest guest room with its simple furnishings registered first as confusion, then as alarm, when her corporate-trained mind calculated the vast distance between this environment and her customary luxurious penthouse. When she attempted to sit up, pain shot through her leg and torso, forcing a gasping retreat back against the pillows as fragmented memories of rain, blood, and desperate flight surged chaotically through her consciousness. The door opened, and her panic escalated exponentially at the sight of a tall black man entering with a tray. Alexandra instinctively pressed herself against the headboard eyes, darting to potential weapons or escape routes despite her injuries. "Where am I? Who are you? What do you want?" The questions tumbled out in the commanding tone she used to intimidate boardroom opponents, though the effect was somewhat diminished by the tremor in her voice. Kalin set the tray down on the bedside table, maintaining a careful distance, as he explained how she had arrived at his doorstep, injured and incoherent the previous night. Alexandra's expression shifted from fear to suspicion, her corporate instincts kicking in despite her physical state. "My phone. Where is it? I need to call my security team immediately." Her hand patted the blankets frantically, before her eyes narrowed accusingly. "Did you take it to prevent me from calling for help? Is this some kind of kidnapping scheme? Do you know who I am or what my company pays for executive protection?" The rapid-fire questions and immediate assumption of criminal intent struck Kalin like physical blows, familiar in their casual racism, yet somehow more painful coming from someone whose life he had just potentially saved. "Your phone was already gone when you arrived," he answered, with the measured calm he'd perfected through countless interactions with white people, whose fear of him required his emotional management of their discomfort. "And yes, Miss Bennett, I know exactly who you are." Before he could continue, the patter of small feet announced Zora's arrival. The child appeared in the doorway, curiosity shining in eyes that mirrored her father's intelligent gaze. "Is the lady feeling better, Daddy?" she asked, clutching a small handmade card decorated with inexpert crayon drawings of flowers. Alexandra's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. She visibly recoiled when Zora approached the bed to offer her creation, causing the child's expression to crumple in confusion and hurt. The casual cruelty of that instinctive flinch broke something in Kalin's carefully maintained composure. "Zora, honey, please go get your breakfast started." "I'll be there in a minute," he said gently, waiting until his daughter's reluctant departure before turning back to Alexandra with steel in his voice. "Yes, Miss Bennett, I know exactly who you are. You're the CEO who built a technology empire on innovations suspiciously similar to those proposed by minority applicants. Applicants like me, whose ideas your company found exciting, but whose presence apparently didn't meet your cultural fit requirements." Alexandra's face registered shock, quickly masked by the corporate armor she'd perfected over years of boardroom battles. "I don't make hiring decisions for every position, and I certainly don't recall your application specifically," she replied coldly. Professional indignation, replacing her earlier fear. "What I do know is that I'm injured in a stranger's home against my will, and I need to contact my people immediately." When she attempted to stand, demonstrating her determination to leave, her injured leg buckled instantly, sending her crashing to the floor with a cry of genuine pain that penetrated even Kalin's justified anger. As he reluctantly helped her back to the bed, the morning news segment playing on the kitchen television caught his attention. Alexandra Bennett, prominent CEO of Bennett Innovations, had been reported missing after failing to return from an Innovations evening engagement. The report featured her fiancé Richard Wellington, a white business magnate whose family name adorned half the buildings in downtown Atlanta, offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. The description of her suspected abductor as possibly a large black man seen in the vicinity sent ice through Kalin's veins as the full danger of his situation crystallized. The woman whose prejudice had just wounded his daughter could now, with a single phone call, bring the full force of law enforcement crashing down on him with a narrative already constructed to presume his guilt. Alexandra had fallen silent too, her attention captured by the television report visible through the doorway, her expression unreadable as she watched her fiancé's performance of concerned devotion. Something flickered across her face, not relief, but what appeared to be a momentary flash of terror quickly suppressed. The silence between them stretched taut with unspoken realizations she was trapped by her injuries, he by the risk her very presence in his home represented. Both recognized the impossible situation, a powerful white woman dependent on the mercy of a black man she had instinctively distrusted, while that same man now harbored someone whose very absence had already placed a target on his back. Days passed in uneasy coexistence as Alexandra's physical condition slowly improved while the outside world's frantic search for her intensified. The initial silence between them had gradually given way to necessary communication, then to reluctant revelations as proximity forced glimpses into each other's realities. It began when Kalin caught Alexandra watching him tend to Zora's hair with practiced gentleness, creating intricate braids while his daughter chattered about school. "My mother taught me, before she passed," he explained, without being asked, noticing Alexandra's poorly concealed surprise. "Black fathers do exist, Miss Bennett, despite what your television might suggest." The slight embarrassment that colored her cheeks suggested his barb had landed. Later that evening, while Zora slept and Kalin worked on his laptop in the living room, Alexandra finally offered the truth he hadn't asked for but had suspected since her arrival. "Richard isn't who people think he is," she said quietly from the doorway where she balanced on the crutches Kalin had purchased, discreetly from a medical supply store 3 towns over. "The charming philanthropist exists only for cameras and board meetings. Behind closed doors her voice trailed off as her hand unconsciously touched the fading bruise on her cheek. Kalin looked up from his screen face carefully neutral. Despite the familiar story unfolding powerful men whose public persona masked private violence was hardly a novel concept. "Is that why you ran? Why you can't call anyone?" Alexandra nodded, easing herself onto the couch with a grimace of pain. "He has connections everywhere, police, media, government. The Wellington family doesn't just build cities, they own the people who run them. The night I arrived here, I finally gathered the courage to leave after She gestured to her injuries, but his security team tracked me to the train station. I barely escaped. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She had fled one danger, only to assume another when seeing Kalin's face. The following morning brought a harsh reminder of the disparate worlds they inhabited when Kalin's neighbor, a friendly, elderly white woman who had always smiled and waved, called the police about a suspicious man in Kalin's own front yard as he retrieved the mail. Alexandra watched from the window as 2 officers approached with hands resting on holsters, their stance relaxing only marginally when they recognized Kalin as the homeowner. The interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but left him visibly drained when he returned inside. "That happens at least twice a month," he explained to her unasked question. "Different neighbors, same concern about the black man who dares to live in a decent neighborhood." Later that same day, a delivery driver refused to approach Kalin's door, leaving a package at the sidewalk despite clear instructions for porch delivery. These small indignities paled compared to Zora's tears when she returned from school after being called racial slurs by classmates who'd overheard their parents discussing the missing white lady and speculating about those people being involved. Watching Kalin comfort his daughter with practiced words that no parent should need to perfect, Alexandra began recognizing patterns she had previously dismissed as exaggeration or isolated incidents. The carefully neutral expression Kalin maintained during video calls with white colleagues who interrupted him constantly, the extra documentation he kept for all purchases in case he was ever accused of theft, the specific instructions he gave Zora about how to behave around police or in stores to avoid being perceived as threatening or suspicious. Alexandra's education in Kalin's reality accelerated when his sister Tanya arrived for a scheduled visit, her immediate hostility toward Alexandra, cutting through any pretense of social niceties. "Are you out of your mind?" Tanya hissed at her brother in the kitchen, her voice carrying clearly to the living room, where Alexandra pretended not to hear. "After what happened to Dad, after what these people did to our family, The subsequent argument revealed the trauma that shaped the siblings' caution their father had spent 12 years wrongfully imprisoned after a white woman falsely accused him of assault following a minor traffic accident. His release and exoneration coming only after irrefutable evidence emerged through the Innocence Project's efforts. By then, their mother had died from stress-induced health complications, and their father had become a shell of himself, unemployable and broken by the system. Meanwhile, Richard Wellington's search for his missing fiancé dominated local media, his resources allowing him to offer rewards, hire private investigators, and shape the narrative. News reports subtly criminalized the unknown kidnapper, while portraying Richard as the devoted partner desperate to find the woman he loved. The increased police presence in Kalin's predominantly black neighborhood created new tensions, as neighbors noted his suddenly closed blinds and quieter household suspicious whispers spreading about what might be happening behind his doors. Are you starting to see how these two worlds exist in the same city, but with completely different rules? Comment number 1, if you've ever witnessed this kind of disparity in your own community, or number 2, if you believe racism is still embedded in our institutions. Like and subscribe if you want more stories that expose these hidden realities in America. Have you ever had to change your behavior to make others comfortable simply because of your skin color? As Kalin and Alexandra's story continues, we'll see how her eyes finally open to privileges she never acknowledged and dangers he could never escape. Within the confines of Kalin's modest home, Alexandra witnessed firsthand what privilege had allowed her to ignore the exhausting vigilance required to navigate a world designed to suspect, fear, and ultimately control black existence. The corporate executive, who prided herself on overcoming gender barriers in business, was confronted with her complicity in racial barriers she had never bothered to see, much less challenge. This uncomfortable awakening accelerated as she watched Kalin tenderly care for his daughter, prepare gourmet meals from simple ingredients, a skill developed from necessity rather than hobby, and work tirelessly on coding projects that kept getting rejected despite their obvious brilliance. One evening, while helping Zora with homework, Alexandra noticed the child's hesitancy around her gradually softening. "My daddy says, you make computers like he does," Zora commented, looking up from her math worksheet. "He's the smartest person in the whole wide world with computers. Did you know that?" The pride in the girl's voice contrasted sharply with the rejection letter Alexandra's company had sent Kalin the previous year. That night, after Zora was asleep, Alexandra found herself asking Kalin why he continued pursuing an industry that repeatedly blocked his advancement. His response illuminated yet another reality she had never considered. Because every black technologist who gives up confirms their belief that we don't belong in their world. My daughter watches everything I do. If I surrender to their limitations, I teach her to accept them too. The fragile equilibrium of their enforced coexistence shattered on the 7th day when a neighbor reported suspicious activity at Kalin's home after noticing an unusual number of grocery deliveries and permanently drawn blinds. 2 police officers arrived for a welfare check that immediately set Kalin on edge, the same officers who had responded to the yard incident days earlier, now returning with thinly veiled suspicion. "Miss 2-0, Bennett, you need to hide," Kalin whispered urgently, leading her to a small, concealed space behind his home office bookshelf that Alexandra hadn't known existed. "Why do you have a panic room?" she asked, bewildered by the hidden door and emergency supplies inside. "Because I'm a black man in America," he answered simply before closing the entrance, leaving her in darkness as the doorbell rang with insistent authority. From her hiding place, Alexandra could hear every word of the interaction. The officer's immediate skepticism of Kalin's explanation for his recent household changes their demands to search his home without a warrant and their Kalin's explanation, questioning about how he afforded his modest house on what they assumed must be questionable income. The thinly veiled contempt in their voices when addressing him contrasted sharply with their professional tones when speaking with Zora, who had returned from a playdate with a neighbor during their inspection. Alexandra's heart nearly stopped when the child innocently mentioned the lady staying with us, prompting renewed suspicion from the officers. Only Kalin's quick explanation about his sister visiting from out of town prevented a more thorough search. After the police finally departed with reluctant warnings about keeping an eye on the situation, Alexandra emerged from hiding, visibly shaking her hands, trembling as Kalin poured her a glass of water. "That happens often enough that you built a secret room?" she asked, the full implications of what she had witnessed settling into her consciousness. "That was relatively pleasant," Kalin replied, with the bitter humor of someone accustomed to far worse. "Last year they made me sit on the curb in handcuffs for 40 minutes because someone reported a break-in when I forgot my keys and had to enter through a window." Zora watched the whole thing from inside. The casual recounting of such humiliation, not as an exceptional event, but as an expected occurrence, left Alexandra speechless. The accumulated weight of everything she had witnessed in Kalin's daily life finally breaking through her remaining defenses. That night, unable to sleep and increasingly mobile on her crutches, Alexandra wandered into Kalin's home office, where his computer glowed with lines of code. Curious, she scrolled through the project he had minimized before helping her to bed earlier, an accessibility software platform that could revolutionize technology for disabled users with innovative interface solutions she had never seen in www.gov. Any commercial product. The elegant design and thoughtful implementations were precisely what her company had been struggling to develop for its next major release. "That's private." Kalin's voice from the doorway startled her, his expression a complex mixture of anger and resignation, though I shouldn't be surprised at the breach of privacy. "Your kind always believe you're entitled to whatever you want to examine." The harshness of his tone reflected more than the current moment. It carried years of accumulated injuries. "This is remarkable work," Alexandra said quietly, ignoring the justified barb. "Bennett Innovations has a team of 30 people working on accessibility solutions that aren't half this sophisticated." Kalin's laugh held no humor. "I know. I submitted this exact platform to your company last year as part of my job application. The rejection letter called it interesting but not commercially viable. 6 months later, your company announced a remarkably similar initiative, led by a white developer from Stanford." The accusation hung between them, impossible to dismiss, as Alexandra recognized elements in his design that had indeed appeared in her company's subsequent project. The realization of her complicity, whether through action or indifference in the systematic theft of black innovation, struck her with physical force. "I didn't know," she whispered, the defense sounding hollow even to her own ears. "You didn't want to know," Kalin corrected, his controlled voice, belying the emotion behind his words. "That's how the system works. White executives claim ignorance while benefiting from discrimination they never have to acknowledge. Do you have any idea what it costs to constantly prove your worth in a world designed to devalue everything you create?" The dam broke then. Alexandra's carefully constructed corporate persona crumbling as she confronted her role in perpetuating the very barriers she had prided herself on breaking as a woman in tech. Tears she had not allowed, even after Richard's worst abuse, flowed freely now, not for herself, but for the harm she had blindly enabled. Kalin watched her breakdown with complicated emotions crossing his face, empathy, warring with justified resentment, human compassion challenging protective distance. Something shifted between them, in that raw moment of truth, a tentative bridge forming across the chasm of their different realities. This fragile connection was immediately threatened when the late-night news broadcast featured Richard announcing he had narrowed his search for Alexandra to their specific neighborhood, his resources having tracked her last known location to a 3-mile radius that included Kalin's home. The photograph accompanying the story showed Richard's practiced concern, but Alexandra's visceral flinch at his image revealed what his public persona concealed. Kalin's expression hardened as he realized the net was tightening around them both, her presence endangering him with every passing day, while her departure would leave her vulnerable to the man whose violence had driven her to his, quote, doorstep in the first place. The next morning confirmed their worst fears. Unmarked vehicles with tinted windows began appearing on Kalin's street, circling the block at regular intervals, while men with telephoto lenses photographed houses from parked cars. "Those are Richard's private investigators," Alexandra confirmed, peering cautiously through a sliver of blinds. Ex-military and former police, many with questionable records, but excellent connections. He uses them to gather leverage on business competitors. The quiet statement carried dark implications about what Richard might do with such resources if he discovered her whereabouts. He has judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll, and police commanders at his charity galas. She continued, her voice flat with resignation. When I first tried reporting his abuse, the detective who took my statement was playing golf with Richard the very next day. The police report mysteriously vanished, and my assistant who witnessed one of his attacks was fired and blacklisted across the industry. The systematic abuse of power she described matched the institutional barriers Kalin had faced throughout his life, different manifestations of the same corrupted system. Recognizing the escalating danger, Kalin began devising a plan to get Alexandra to safety using his tech-savvy skills. My college roommate runs a women's shelter in Tennessee with enhanced security protocols. They specifically work with high-profile cases and have connections to legal advocacy groups that specialize in powerful abusers. Alexandra listened to his proposal, with growing alarm, shaking her head firmly. "I'm not leaving until we clear your name. If I disappear and you're left as the suspected kidnapper, Richard will make sure you're destroyed. He doesn't just defeat opponents, he erases them completely." The determination in her voice surprised them both, her concern for his welfare representing a profound shift from her initial suspicion. Their debate about next steps was interrupted by a call from Zora's school requesting an immediate parent conference. Upon arrival, Kalin found his daughter in the principal's office with tear-stained cheeks and uncharacteristically tangled hair. The white classmate who had pulled her braids and called her a racial slur sat smugly beside his father, a man Kalin recognized with sinking dread as one of Richard Wellington's company executives. Principal Whitmore's dismissive attitude became apparent immediately. "Children will be children, Mr. Washington," but Zora's reaction was quite excessive. Perhaps she's sensitive due to her home situation. The thinly veiled racism behind the comment ignited Kalin's carefully controlled anger. "My daughter was physically assaulted and verbally abused with language. No 6-year-old should know, much less use. That's not childish behavior. It's learned prejudice." The other father bristled immediately. "Are you accusing my son of racism? He's too young to even understand such concepts." Kalin maintained his composure with practiced effort. "Children his age absolutely understand exclusion and cruelty. They learn it from watching adults categorize certain people as less worthy of respect." Principal Whitmore cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Washington, perhaps your community places different values on certain words, but here we focus on moving forward positively, rather than dwelling on perceived slights." The casual dismissal of racial trauma as perceived slights sent a familiar wave of helpless rage through Kalin, another authority figure, gaslighting his experience while protecting the perpetrator. What he didn't expect was Alexandra's intervention. Having accompanied him against his wishes, but remaining unrecognized with her bruises, faded baseball cap, and casual clothing, she had observed the entire exchange from a chair in the corner. "Excuse me," she interrupted, her CEO voice cutting through the principal's placating tones. "As an education board donor and corporate foundation director, I find your handling of this situation professionally negligent and potentially actionable. The school's policies on discriminatory language are quite clear, as is the zero-tolerance approach to physical harassment." The room fell silent as Alexandra's authoritative presence shifted the power dynamic instantly. Principal Whitmore's expression morphed from dismissive to concerned as Alexandra continued. "I'd be interested to know if the school's significant technology grant from the Bennett Foundation should be redirected to institutions with more robust anti-discrimination enforcement." The executive's face drained of color as he finally recognized her beneath the disguise. "Miss Bennett, we thought you were Alexandra." Cut him off smoothly. "Taking personal time, yes. How fortunate that it allowed me to witness this situation firsthand. I'll be discussing your department's approach to diversity with Richard shortly." The calculated mention of Richard's name created immediate panic, as neither man could determine whether she was truly in contact with her fiancé or what she might have told him about them. The meeting concluded with profuse apologies to Kalin and Zora, promises of disciplinary action, and significantly altered demeanors from both the principal and executive. In the car afterward, Kalin's stunned silence finally broke. "You shouldn't have revealed yourself. It's dangerous." Alexandra's response was simple. Using privilege to protect the vulnerable is the bare minimum requirement of decency. That night, as trust deepened between them through shared vulnerability and growing mutual respect, the precarious safety of Kalin's home shattered. Richard's men, tipped off by the executive from the school, broke in while they slept. The terrifying confrontation in darkness brought Alexandra's worst fears to life, as two armed intruders demanded she come with them for her own protection. When one man grabbed Zora as leverage, Kalin's protective fury erupted in a desperate fight that left him seriously injured, a concussion and broken ribs, the price of creating enough chaos for Alexandra to activate the home's alarm system. The intruders fled just before police sirens approached, leaving behind blood evidence but taking with them any proof of Richard's involvement. The responding officers arrived rapidly, the same ones who had shown such suspicion during the welfare check, now openly skeptical of Kalin's account of home invasion. Convenient that these alleged intruders mentioned Mrs. Miss Bennett when she's been missing for over a week, one officer commented while barely bothering to dust for fingerprints. And no items stolen, just a coincidental attack mentioning a high-profile missing person. Their cursory investigation concluded with thinly veiled accusations rather than support the report filed with noticeable omissions that would make any future legal action nearly impossible. As Alexandra helped Kalin to the couch after the police departed, the blood from his head wound staining her sleeve, the brutal reality of their situation became clear. They were both trapped in a system designed to protect powerful abusers while criminalizing their victims, particularly when those victims were black. With Kalin injured and barely able to move without pain, the household dynamics shifted dramatically. Alexandra found herself thrust into the role of caregiver for both father and daughter, navigating a world she had previously viewed only through the protective bubble of privilege. Taking Kalin to the emergency room became her first lesson in the disparities of American healthcare. Despite his obvious injuries and semi-conscious state, they waited for hours while less severely injured white patients were called ahead of them. When finally seen, the doctor addressed all questions to Alexandra rather than Kalin, assuming she was the decision-maker, despite being clearly identified as a friend. "He's probably just looking for pain medication," the physician commented quietly to Alexandra, as though Kalin couldn't hear the implication of drug-seeking behavior. We see a lot of that with Alexandra cut him off with the full force of her executive authority. With patients in obvious distress from traumatic injuries, complete the examination and provide appropriate care immediately, or I'll be contacting your chief of medicine about discriminatory treatment. The doctor's demeanor changed instantly at her commanding tone, though the quality of care improved only marginally. The astronomical bill that followed, even with insurance, illuminated another reality Kalin navigated routinely. "This is why black families stay in debt cycles," he explained, through pain-fogged consciousness as Alexandra stared at the five-figure sum. "One emergency can erase years of careful financial planning." The pharmacy presented yet another barrier, the pharmacist questioning the legitimacy of Kalin's prescription, suggesting it had unusual dosing and requiring verification despite the hospital's electronic submission. Each interaction forced Alexandra to witness discrimination she would have previously attributed to individual rudeness rather than systemic bias. Her growing understanding of these injustices transformed her from reluctant houseguest to fierce advocate, using her privilege as armor against a system designed to wear Kalin down through 1,000 daily cuts. Meanwhile, Richard escalated his search efforts with press conferences featuring subtle but unmistakable racial undertones. "We have reason to believe my fiancé is being held against her will in this community," he announced to reporters while standing in a predominantly black neighborhood just blocks from Kalin's home. "We're asking residents to report any unusual activity involving unfamiliar African American males in the area." The thinly veiled targeting placed every black man in the vicinity under suspicion, creating an atmosphere of heightened tension and police scrutiny that further endangered Kalin. During one particularly difficult night when Kalin's pain prevented sleep, Zora crawled into Alexandra's temporary bed seeking comfort. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" the child whispered, her voice small with worry that no 6-year-old should carry. "He has to be okay. I don't want him to leave like Mommy did." The innocent comment opened a conversation that revealed another layer of injustice Alexandra had never considered. "Mommy didn't just die from cancer," Zora explained with the direct simplicity of children. "The doctors didn't believe she was sick until it was too big inside her. Daddy took her to lots of doctors, but they said she was just tired from working and being a mommy." The child's account matched what Kalin later confirmed. Amara had complained of symptoms for nearly 18 months before receiving proper diagnosis, repeatedly dismissed by white doctors who attributed her reports of pain to exaggeration or stress. By the time her cancer was finally discovered, it had metastasized beyond effective treatment. The preventable tragedy explained the accessibility software Kalin had been developing. His project specifically addressed racial disparities in healthcare through technology designed to standardize symptom reporting and remove provider bias from initial assessments. How many of us have witnessed or experienced healthcare discrimination? Comment number 1. If you or someone you know has had symptoms dismissed because of race, gender, or appearance. Like this video if you believe we need more transparency in medical care, and subscribe to follow stories that expose these critical issues. Do you think Kalin and Zora will ever receive justice for what happened to Amara? As we continue their journey with Alexandra, we'll see how her growing awareness of these injustices transforms her from part of the problem into potentially part of the solution. As Alexandra's attachment to both Kalin and Zora deepened beyond sympathy into genuine care, her investigation into Richard's business dealings revealed a pattern that mirrored her personal experience with him. Using her limited communication channels through Kalin's secure systems, she discovered that Bennett Innovations' breakthrough technology, the innovation that had launched her career and company, had originally been developed by a brilliant black female scientist named Dr. Janelle Roberts. The paper trail showed Dr. Roberts had filed preliminary patents before mysteriously resigning after a dispute with Richard, who had been an early investor. The pattern repeated throughout his business history. Promising minority innovators disappeared from companies shortly before their white counterparts received credit and promotion for remarkably similar breakthroughs. As Kalin recovered enough to resume limited activity, the dynamic between him and Alexandra evolved from cautious cooperation to genuine connection. Their late-night conversations revealed shared passions for technological innovation and similar visions for more equitable futures, their differences in life experience creating complementary perspectives rather than divisions. The growing romantic tension between them remained largely unacknowledged, both aware of the complications their respective situations presented. "Even if we survive this immediate danger," Kalin commented during one such conversation, "an interracial couple in the South faces obstacles most relationships never encounter. My parents' generation had cross-burnings on their lawns for daring to love across color lines." Alexandra's response reflected her evolving awareness. That hasn't changed as much as white America pretends. Richard lost major investors when rumors spread that his previous girlfriend was biracial. His racism isn't just personal prejudice, it's calculated business strategy. Their growing closeness provided comfort amid increasing external threats, but both recognized the fragility of their situation as Richard's search narrowed its focus with each passing day. After 2 weeks of healing and hiding, Alexandra determined their only path forward required external allies. Using Kalin's specialized encryption methods, she contacted her loyal executive assistant, Mia, one of the few people at Bennett Innovations who had witnessed Richard's abusive behavior firsthand. Their carefully crafted message outlined a plan to meet at a small cafe 3 towns over where Alexandra would provide evidence of both Richard's domestic violence and his systematic theft of minority innovations throughout his business empire. Once we have the documentation secured with multiple allies, we can simultaneously clear your name and expose Richard's crimes. Alexandra explained to Kalin, who remained skeptical about trusting anyone connected to her previous life. Despite his reservations, they prepared meticulously, for the meeting disguises multiple transportation methods and careful timing to minimize their public exposure. On the appointed day, Alexandra arrived at the cafe wearing a medical boot for her healing leg, and unrecognizable with dyed hair and makeup that subtly altered her facial structure. The precautions proved devastatingly inadequate when Richard himself appeared at the rendezvous point instead of Mia, his practiced smile failing to mask the cold fury in his eyes as he slid into the booth across from her. "Your encryption needs work," he commented casually, placing her phone, which had disappeared the night she fled, on the table between them. "Mia tried to delete your messages after forwarding them to me, but technology always leaves traces." The calculated menace behind his conversational tone froze Alexandra in place as he continued, "You've led me on quite a chase, darling. Imagine my surprise discovering you've been playing house with a software engineer whose application I personally ensured would never succeed." Small world, isn't it? The casual mention of his deliberate sabotage of Kalin's career confirmed Alexandra's worst suspicions about Richard's business practices, but offered no immediate escape from her current danger. When she attempted to leave, Richard's hand clamped around her wrist with bruising force beneath the table. "Public scene or private reckoning, Alexandra, your choice. But understand that your little friend Washington is currently the subject of an anonymous tip regarding the kidnapping and assault of a prominent businesswoman. The responding officers have interesting histories involving excessive force with black suspects. The unveiled threat against Kalin, and by extension, Zora, crystallized Alexandra's impossible position. "What do you want?" she asked, her CEO voice reduced to a whisper. Richard's terms were simple and devastating return to their engagement. Maintain public appearances as the loving fiancé, while he controlled the narrative about her traumatic experience and recovery, or watch as he systematically destroyed Kalin through false charges that would separate him from his daughter permanently. "Your choice reflects your true character," Richard concluded, with smug certainty. "Will you sacrifice yourself for a man who means nothing to you, or return to the life you've spent years building? We both know what ambitious women ultimately choose." With cameras recording their interaction from multiple angles, evidence being created to support whatever narrative, Richard chose to promote Alexandra, made the only decision that might protect Kalin and Zora. She agreed to Richard's terms while managing to slip a napkin with a hastily scrawled warning message into her purse, which she deliberately forgot at the cafe for Kalin to recover from their backup meeting point. The message contained a coded warning, and the name of Dr. Janelle Roberts, the black scientist whose innovation Richard had stolen information Kalin could potentially use to build a case without Alexandra's direct involvement. Returning to Richard's mansion felt like entering a beautifully appointed prison. The staff who greeted her with rehearsed smiles had been replaced during her absence. New faces meant no witnesses to her previous injuries or escape. In Richard's private office, Alexandra discovered the horrifying extent of his prejudice while pretending to reclaim her executive duties. Password-protected files he believed she couldn't access revealed private messages with white supremacist politicians whose campaigns he secretly funded systematic economic warfare against minority-owned businesses competing economic. With his interests and damning correspondence about embedding facial recognition technology with documented racial biases into government security systems. Meanwhile, Kalin found Alexandra's warning message and immediately recognized the danger. His attempt to report Richard's crimes to police resulted in exactly the scenario Richard had threatened. Officers arrived at his home with a warrant for his arrest as Alexandra's suspected abductor, the excessive force used during his detainment requiring no special instruction given the officers' existing biases. In jail, Kalin faced treatment that darkly mirrored Alexandra's captivity, isolation, physical intimidation, and deliberate humiliation designed to break both body and spirit. Despite his sister Tanya's frantic efforts to secure legal representation, the serious charges and Richard's influence ensured bail was set prohibitively high. Most devastating was Zora's placement with Child Protective Services. Despite Tanya's petitions for temporary custody, the system's inherent biases favoring unknown white foster homes over qualified black family members with concerning connections to an accused criminal. Television news ran constant coverage of Richard's carefully crafted narrative. The devoted fiancé who had rescued his beloved from a dangerous kidnapper, with Alexandra standing silently beside him during press conferences, her vacant eyes and rehearsed smile, communicating a different truth to anyone looking beyond the performance. Social media erupted with predictable racist commentary about black criminality and white victimhood, the story feeding perfectly into existing prejudices without requiring evidence beyond Richard's compelling emotional appeals. From his jail cell, watching the news coverage on a communal television, Kalin recognized both his impending destruction and the silent cry for help behind Alexandra's camera-ready appearance. With limited options and diminishing hope, he activated the only leverage remaining: the brilliant software platform he had developed and the evidence of corporate theft he had documented throughout his career. From the confines of his jail cell, Kalin executed a contingency plan, years in the making, one born from the persistent experience of having innovation stolen from black creators throughout his career. Through a complex series of pre-programmed commands activated by his sister Tanya during her brief visitation, Kalin released his complete accessibility software platform as open-source code on multiple developer platforms. Simultaneously, the revolutionary program contained more than innovative interfaces embedded within its elegant architecture, was documented evidence of systematic corporate espionage and racial discrimination throughout the technology sector, including records of Richard's targeted destruction of minority-owned businesses and theft of their intellectual property. The software's immediate viral spread throughout global technology communities created a firestorm that traditional media initially ignored but could not long suppress. Tech experts worldwide recognize the revolutionary potential of Kalin's accessibility innovations while uncovering the damning documentation woven throughout its architecture. As online communities exploded with analysis and outrage, Tanya leveraged her connections in Atlanta's black professional networks to amplify the story, creating a coordinated campaign across social media platforms that contrasted Kalin's brilliant contributions with his unjust imprisonment. Civil rights organizations, tech industry watchdogs, and legal advocacy groups began requesting access to Kalin's case, bringing scrutiny that Richard's influence had previously prevented. Meanwhile, Alexandra engaged in her own form of resistance within the gilded cage of Richard's mansion. While pretending to be subdued by medication and trauma, she strategically gathered evidence, placing hidden recording devices in rooms where Richard conducted private business, documenting his abusive behavior during moments he believed were unwitnessed, and secretly accessing his protected servers to download financial records showing systematic discrimination in hiring, firing, and acquisition practices. The performance required to maintain her cover exacted a brutal psychological toll each public appearance, as Richard's rescued fiancé reinforcing narratives that endangered Kalin while maintaining her own physical safety. Most devastating were the reports she received through carefully established covert channels about Zora's placement with a white foster family who demonstrated little cultural competence or emotional sensitivity. The child's traumatic separation from her father was compounded by caretakers who disregarded her cultural identity, cutting her carefully maintained natural hair without permission and dismissing her questions about when she could return home. Through a compassionate social worker who recognized the injustice unfolding, Alexandra managed to send Zora secret messages of reassurance through small gifts that appeared to come from children's services but contained coded communications from Miss Alex, promising that both she and Kalin were working to reunite their family. The dual resistance campaigns gained momentum as Kalin's software revealed discrimination patterns across Richard's business empire. Influential technology leaders began publicly questioning the narrative surrounding the kidnapping, pointing to the sophisticated ethical framework embedded in Kalin's code as evidence of his character. People who create accessibility tools designed to help the most vulnerable don't typically engage in violent crimes, noted one prominent software developer in a viral video analyzing the platform's architecture. This code represents thousands of hours dedicated to helping others. We need to question why its creator has been silenced. As public pressure mounted and independent journalists began investigating discrepancies in Richard's account, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. The carefully maintained public persona began showing cracks during press appearances, his charming concern giving way to flashes of anger when questioned about inconsistencies or Kalin's software revelations. In private, his treatment of Alexandra escalated from controlling to dangerous, his physical and emotional abuse intensifying as his public image deteriorated. The breaking point came during a pharmaceutical industry gala where Richard was receiving a humanitarian award for his company's supposedly groundbreaking work on minority health initiatives, work Alexandra now knew had been stolen from Black researchers systematically pushed out of the industry. During his acceptance speech, a prominent technology journalist asked about similarities between his company's recent patents and Kalin Washington's open-source platform. Richard's composure shattered momentarily, his response revealing contempt that the cameras captured despite his quick recovery. I hardly think we should compare legitimate research with the work of criminals attempting to capitalize on their notoriety. The mask had slipped just enough for careful observers to glimpse the truth beneath. That night, Richard's rage exploded in private, his physical attack leaving Alexandra with no choice but to implement her emergency escape plan. Using the security vulnerabilities she had mapped throughout her captivity, she fled with the accumulated evidence, seeking immediate protection through a domestic violence advocacy group with experience handling high-profile cases. Their established protocols included secure transportation to a courthouse where Alexandra filed for emergency protection while submitting her evidence to multiple law enforcement agencies, simultaneously ensuring no single corrupt official could bury her case. In a dramatic courtroom scene that drew national media attention, Alexandra publicly testified about Richard's abuse, racism, and corporate crimes. Her testimony methodically dismantled the false narrative surrounding her disappearance while providing irrefutable evidence of Richard's systematic discrimination against Black innovators throughout his business empire. Most powerfully, she described how Kalin and Zora had shown her the humanity she had denied in others through her complicity with systemic racism. "I was not kidnapped," she stated for the record, her voice unwavering, despite Richard's intimidating presence across the courtroom. "I was rescued by a man who had every reason to turn me away after how my company had treated him. He and his daughter showed me compassion I didn't deserve and opened my eyes to injustices I had willfully ignored throughout my career. My greatest shame isn't what Richard did to me. It's what I allowed to happen to others, through my silence and participation in systems designed to exclude people like Kalin Washington from opportunities they had rightfully earned." The charges against Kalin were dropped with unusual speed as public pressure mounted, and Alexandra's testimony undermined the entire foundation of the prosecution's case. His release from county jail became a media spectacle, cameras capturing his gaunt appearance and the emotional reunion with his sister Tanya, who had maintained a constant vigil outside the facility throughout his incarceration. Conspicuously absent was Zora, whose return to her father faced bureaucratic obstacles despite the dismissal of all charges. Alexandra leveraged her considerable corporate influence to expose the widespread racial discrimination embedded within the technology industry, sacrificing her prestigious reputation by publicly acknowledging her own past biases, and harmful decisions. "I built my career on the stolen innovations of Black creators, who were systematically excluded from recognition and compensation," she testified before an industry ethics committee investigating Richard's business practices. "My success came at the direct expense of brilliant minds like Kalin Washington, whose contributions were appropriated while their careers were deliberately undermined through practices I either enabled or chose not to see." Her candor cost her professional relationships and social standing among the elite circles that had previously embraced her. Many former colleagues distancing themselves as she dismantled the comfortable myths that sustained their shared privilege. The criminal investigation into Richard expanded beyond initial charges of domestic violence and witness intimidation to include corporate espionage, fraud, and civil rights violations. Federal prosecutors uncovered a pattern of targeted harassment against minority innovators throughout his business history, with Alexandra's testimony providing the framework that connected previously isolated complaints into a comprehensive case against his entire operation. While legal proceedings advanced, Kalin finally regained custody of Zora following weeks of hearings and evaluations that subjected them both to scrutiny no white family would have faced under similar circumstances. Their reunion, though joyous, revealed the trauma their separation had caused Zora's nightmares and newfound anxiety around authority figures, demonstrating how deeply institutional racism had wounded her developing psyche. The child who had once approached each day with boundless curiosity now flinched at sudden movements and questioned whether people in uniforms would take her away again. Though publicly vindicated, Kalin discovered that exoneration didn't erase suspicion. Neighbors who had previously maintained cautious friendliness now regarded him with complicated emotions. Their relief at his innocence mingled with lingering doubts planted by weeks of media coverage portraying him as dangerous. Some community members questioned his relationship with the white woman who had nearly destroyed his life, viewing Alexandra's continued presence as betrayal of racial solidarity despite her efforts to make amends. She used her privilege to help in the end. One neighbor commented during a community meeting, but where was that privilege when her company was stealing from black innovators for years? Some white tears and suddenly we're supposed to welcome her into our community. The criticism reflected legitimate wounds that no single act of atonement could heal, regardless of Alexandra's genuine remorse. Alexandra's professional transformation reflected her personal evolution. She resigned as CEO of Bennett Innovations, using her substantial severance package and personal fortune to establish a foundation supporting minority technology innovators. With Kalin as director, the initiative provided funding, mentorship, and legal protection for black creators whose innovations had previously been vulnerable to corporate appropriation. Though many celebrated this commitment to structural change, others viewed it with cynicism. Another white savior, creating a charity. Instead of addressing why the system allowed her to profit from discrimination in the first place, wrote one prominent technology blogger, while others labeled Kalin a sellout for working with the profit woman whose company had rejected his application based on cultural fit concerns. 3 months after Kalin's release, as they cautiously rebuilt trust and defined their complicated relationship amid public scrutiny, Richard's final act of vengeance unfolded through his remaining business connections. His allies in finance systematically undermined the foundation's funding sources while initiating regulatory investigations into Alexandra's remaining assets. Corporate donors withdrew support following whispered concerns about reputational risks, while Kalin faced renewed scrutiny regarding his software's underlying patents despite its open-source release. The coordinated attack threatened not only their professional partnership, but the innovative programs they had established to address systemic inequities within the technology sector. Facing potential financial ruin together, Kalin and Alexandra discovered their greatest strength lay in their transformed perspectives. They can take the foundation, the funding, even the patents. Kalin told Alexandra during a late-night strategy session after receiving news that another major donor had withdrawn support. But they can't take what we've learned or the people we've become through this experience. Alexandra's response reflected her evolution from corporate executive to advocate. The system is designed to exhaust resistance through 1,000 cuts rather than single fatal blows. Our greatest threat to their power isn't our resources, it's our refusal to surrender the truth we now see clearly. That clarity guided their response to Richard's systematic attacks. Rather than fighting individual battles against his vast network, they shifted their approach, entirely leveraging Kalin's technological brilliance and Alexandra's industry knowledge to create an entirely new paradigm for equitable innovation. At a major technology conference where Kalin had been invited to present an advanced version of his accessibility software, they unveiled their vision for the future, with Zora and Alexandra supporting from the audience. As Kalin demonstrated how technology could bridge human divides by making digital spaces accessible to all users, regardless of physical, cognitive, or socioeconomic barriers, shots rang out from the conference hall balcony. Richard, released on bail pending his trial, had orchestrated one final act of hatred, attempting to silence the innovation he couldn't control and the truth he couldn't suppress. In the chaos that followed, it was Alexandra who instinctively shielded Zora, while Kalin tackled Richard, their roles reversed from their first meeting, as each protected what the other valued most. Security subdued Richard as he shouted, "Racist accusations!" His public mask finally shattered completely, before the industry leaders who had long enabled his success through their silence and complicity. As emergency responders treated minor injuries and police led Richard away in handcuffs, Kalin, Alexandra, and Zora found themselves standing united on the presentation, stage 3 people whose lives had collided through violence but transformed through recognition of their shared humanity. The incident and its aftermath drew national attention, the dramatic confrontation serving as powerful visual metaphor for the larger struggle against systemic racism and innovation theft. Journalists who covered the technology sector began investigating similar patterns across the industry, while Black developers shared long-suppressed stories of discrimination that mirrored Kalin's experience. The movement they had begun grew beyond their individual story, creating momentum for structural reforms that even Richard's extensive influence couldn't contain. 1 year later, the foundation they had built faced continued challenges, but had successfully launched dozens of minority-led technology initiatives with revolutionary potential. Their personal relationship evolved, gradually shaped by the understanding that healing occurred at different rates for different wounds. Zora's resilience provided their greatest inspiration, her childhood wisdom reminding both adults that transformation required not only acknowledging past harm, but actively building something better for the future. The bad man tried to keep us apart because he didn't want people to see what happens when we work together, she observed while helping Kalin test a new educational program designed for children from disadvantaged communities. But now, everybody can see what you and Miss Alex make together is better than what anybody makes alone. What's your take on this story? Could you see yourself having the courage that Alexandra showed in admitting her role in a biased system, or the resilience Kalin demonstrated in fighting for justice? Comment below with which character resonated with you most. If you believe these stories matter and need to be told, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can create a world where innovation is judged by its merit rather than its creator's skin color. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey. And remember, sometimes our greatest transformations begin with the simple recognition of another person's humanity. Invisible Wounds teaches us that privilege isn't just about wealth or status, it's about systems designed to elevate some while suppressing others. Kalin faced discrimination at every turn in his career, where his innovations were stolen in healthcare, where his pain was dismissed in education, where his daughter's trauma was minimized, and in law enforcement, where his innocence was presumed guilt. Alexandra's journey from complicity to awareness represents the uncomfortable but necessary awakening that privileged individuals must undergo to become true allies. True change requires more than acknowledgement. It demands action, sacrifice, and the courage to challenge systems that benefit us. The story reminds us that racial discrimination isn't always obvious hatred. Often it's embedded in cultural fit rejections, unconscious biases, and institutional practices that seem neutral but systematically disadvantage minorities. Redemption comes at a price. Both Kalin and Alexandra paid heavily, he with his freedom and dignity, she with her career and status. Yet their transformation created ripples beyond their individual lives, challenging an entire industry to confront its biases. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that real innovation comes when we recognize everyone's humanity and create spaces where talent flourishes, regardless of skin color. The greatest technology isn't code or gadgets, but the human connections that help us see beyond our differences. What barriers have you faced or witnessed in your own life that mirror Kalin's struggles? Or have you experienced a moment of awakening like Alexandra, suddenly seeing biases you'd previously ignored? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this narrative touched your heart or opened your eyes, please like this video to help others find it too. The journey toward understanding often begins with stories that challenge our perspectives, so consider sharing this with someone who might benefit from walking in different shoes for a while. Subscribe to join our community dedicated to exposing these hidden realities through powerful storytelling. Your support helps ensure these crucial conversations continue. Thank you for listening with an open heart and mind. Together we can build a world where innovation and opportunity aren't limited by skin color, but expanded by our diverse experiences and perspectives.